Hey everybody, Smruti Patel, VP of Engineering at ApollographQL. Super excited to be talking to all of you today and our esteemed panelists. So let me begin by setting the stage. So we've all heard how platform engineering is transforming every layer of the stack. But when you think about it, what is it really doing for this crucial API layer? And this is especially a place where we've learned how backend services can be written, how data can be organized, regardless how front ends are written. For us, API becomes that connective tissue, bringing it all together. And traditionally, APIs have been handled largely on a team-by-team basis. And most of the platform problems have been concerned around solving for API gateway things like demand control and auth. Yet today, what we'll hear from our panelists is the API challenge of this decade goes beyond egress or ingress management. It's a lot about composition. How do we, in a world of LLMs, like Watson showed, unify these APIs such that we can provide these transformative digital experiences for our users? How do we think about governance without gatekeeping and avoid impedance to developer productivity? And so today, the good news is we've got 3 experts with us who will help answer some of these questions for us. So let's begin with introductions.
Hi, my name is John. I'm from the New York Times. I'm a senior engineering manager for our very own GraphQL platform team.
Hey, John.
I'm Brendan McNichols. I'm Senior Director of Architecture at Cox Automotive in the Cox Automotive Data Solutions Group.
Hi, I'm Greg Wardwell. I'm a staff engineer at Wayfair on their GraphQL platforms team.
A very warm welcome, John, Brendan, and Greg. When we think about architecting the future, we look at what is our present, and as leaders, we don't change what is broken. So tell us a little about what prompted each of you to go through this change. What was not working about the status quo? Why did your old architecture or your API platform not help you serve the needs of your users, your teams, your businesses?
For us at the Times, it all comes down, in short, time to market for product. So like many of you who are into GraphQL, our journey started with a monograph, a single GraphQL service where we had an open contribution model that would provide data to our client developers. And it worked. It worked well. So good that, in fact, we started to become bottleneck. You think about a particular planning cycle where you got 34 major roadmap asks, and you're managing upwards of 150 contributions. And in our case, that was Scala, Sangria contributions, shepherding all of those PRs through while we're trying to provide this service. So we became a bottleneck. So the answer for us at the end of the day was, okay, it's time to platform. And that's where federated GraphQL came in.
Interesting. Thank you, John. Brendan, how about you?
Yeah, so at Cox, we've grown from a bunch of acquisitions of smaller companies, right? And so, we needed to essentially unify the company. And so, we have this API management team that is building out that centralized functionality, which is great because that gets all of our APIs into a single discoverable location. It eliminates the need for any team to have to do API management on their own. And also gets us to like a single auth mechanism, right? And all of that is great. It's a huge step forward, but it doesn't solve the problem of how to get those APIs to work together, right? And so, we needed a couple of things to get to the next level. Number one, we needed to be able to orchestrate all of those API calls together, right? So in order to compose a solution, you frequently need to make multiple calls. Sometimes they depend on each other, sometimes they don't, right? And that code can get very complex, and it's undifferentiated code, which we don't want to have to write and maintain for the long term, right? And so we need to solve that problem. But then the other thing is all of our APIs are kind of talking a different language, right? So we don't really have a common ontology, and so we need the governance ability to be able to get all of our APIs to kind of speak the same language, right? And so I think that's what gets us to the next level, and to sort of make our, not our APIs products, or really one product, right?
Thank you, Brendan. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, honestly, John and Brendan said a lot of the same things that we experienced. We struggled with time to market issues, like John mentioned, and we struggled with duplicative APIs that were all tightly governed by different business organizations, and they oftentimes talked about the same concepts in different ways, and then clients needed to figure out how to get the data and who to get it from, and maybe one has some of it, one is missing some of another thing they need. And so for us, it became a problem of, and many of them were built monolithic. So great big code bases. And so as we wanted to split that up, we stepped back and looked at how could we do this in a more mature way and eliminate some of that duplicative nature of our implementation.
Yeah, so I heard some similar themes across all your answers, right? For Brendan, you talked about the need for unifying APIs, whether the use case was for the business was mergers and acquisition, and with that came different tech stacks, I'm guessing, different ways of doing things, duplications, semantic collisions. John, you talked a lot about improving the lead time for feature velocity and then having your team not be the bottleneck, so to speak. And Greg, you talked a lot about having too many implementations of the graph, but with too little control, almost like this wild, wild west, I think I heard you say. So clearly, the status quo was broken, and something needed to be done. I'm curious, what was then your platform of choice? What was the architectural choice you made, and why did you choose it? John, let's start with you.
Well, for us, it was GraphQL Federation. We needed a solution that made sense for the business, but then also made sense for the teams of humans that are domain owners of the pieces and parts of the supergraph. So on the whole, and GraphQL Federation kind of allowed us to do that. So think about news and publishing, user information, messaging, personalized content, all kinds of different areas. With GraphQL Federation, domain experts can own the delivery of services and products and iterate freely. On the one hand. On the other hand, they can also make their API available to the rest of the organization by way of a common protocol, by way of a GraphQL query. So it was kind of a good way for us to provide that to the rest of the organization and get out of the way. So we realized early on, if we did our jobs right and platform right, we would get out of the business of building APIs as a team ourselves and into the business of building a platform that other teams could ship their APIs on.
Love it. That resonates with me. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I think you'll end up noticing a trend that we all went with Apollo Federation. But
Not a trick question.
for us, we saw the opportunity to get to that decoupled space and break apart our monolithic implementations, but also to unify our API across the entire every organization that's part of Wayfair to get to a single API, and but without losing the control that these different business organizations really did want, because they still have control through subgraphs that they get to build, and they get to own the contributions that they're making. We could still serve our client needs of creating, more bespoke implementations of the API through Apollo's great contracts and tagging mechanisms. So it was the perfect solution that really unlocked all the abilities we were looking for as we kind of rethought our platform.
Got it. Thank you. Brendan?
Yeah, and, no surprise, my answer is the same as John and Greg. I mean, Federation was kind of the obvious choice for us. It's the only solution that we could find that does that orchestration for you, right? And so now our clients, they need only write a single query to get what they need. And so that's great. They don't have to maintain that code, that undifferentiated code for long-term use. I think then the other thing is that Federation really forces you to do governance on your schema, right? And so we really should have been doing that all along.
Okay.
But now we have to. Now we're forced to. We can't ignore the problem anymore. And so that's great. And then there's also a lot of tools that come with GraphOS that help us to do that task. And I think so that's also a big win for us.
Go on, please.
Was there like an aha moment, like an event or a feature or maybe like a critical incident where like it all started to come together, like, oh, I'm glad we did this? I'm just curious. I'm also putting him on the spot here. We didn't plan this.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there was like one single thing. There were a lot of small things, right? So we get a ton of requests from around the company saying, hey, you have this API that does scoring for EVs, right? And when I do a VIN resolution call, I want to be able to get that score too, right? And we're like, well, I suppose we could build you a BFF, or we can use GraphQL Federation to make that happen for you. And so a ton of them.
Lovely. So clearly the status quo was broken. You decided on GraphQL Federation as an architectural choice. And what came through for each of you, for me, was this architecture supports you to allow teams or APIs to evolve independently while still providing this unified access in a safe, reliable, performant, and what I heard you say, Brendan, was a governed way, especially to do this at scale. So I'd love to hop into talking about what are the strategies for adopting this architecture. But before I go into that, Brendan, there's something that you told me which really blew my mind away, and I found it really powerful, which was, it's not about just unifying our APIs, but it's about unifying our entire company and the culture behind it. And that sounds like a massive undertaking. So tell us a little about how do you start? Where do you know where to begin? And how do you bootstrap this journey to set the stage with the right stuff set up?
Yeah. I mean, I think first off, you need the leadership to actually, make that decision and be very, very committed to doing that. But I think we started off in the right place, which is to try to unify our data. And so the data that we get from all of the applications that we have in the industry, which covers the breadth of the automotive industry, is perhaps our greatest competitive advantage in the industry, right? And so bringing all of that together in a data platform was kind of the most logical first step, right? And it allowed us to start making data science-driven API or data products that bring a tremendous amount of value to the industry, right? And so then after that, well, APIs are the way that our clients access those data products, and so that's kind of the logical extension of that. So yeah, that's kind of where we started, which
So you talked about getting organizational buy-in, having leadership sponsorship, and also sort of cleaning the data up. I'm guessing the next step before you roll this out and operationalize the architecture, it's infrastructure. How do you get the infra up and going? And a big part of operationalizing and implementing GraphQL Federation is our Apollo router. And the reason this is a crucial engine is it supports query planning to query execution to enforcement of these business rules, whether for security, whether for governance, but implementing these business policies that are applicable for your business use cases. So Greg and John, you've talked a lot about your experience from moving to the Apollo gateway, to moving to the router. So tell us a little about, once you've set the stage and you're trying to do a safe rollout for your users, get some value in, what have you learned in this journey?
Ooh, Greg, you
John,
beat us.
you can go first.
You bet. Oh, so Greg beat us to the router. Did you want to go first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So, we started out using Apollo Gateway, and as with our pilot implementations, we saw, anybody who's worked with Node knows that its kryptonite is scaling. Like, it does not scale well. And that's exactly what we ran into. Gateway built on Node, it wasn't up to snuff. And luckily, Apollo had this cool thing they were working on called Router. And the initial details of what we saw as far as performance goes, we were all about it. Like, it looked great. So we designed a strategy to migrate. And so we took all the customizations we'd done to Gateway, and we either rebuilt them or figured out how to get rid of them, and built that out with Router. And then we took a strategy of mirroring our gateway traffic. Again, we were in a pilot phase, so it wasn't huge traffic at the time, but we took that approach, mirroring, to validate that everything was working exactly as we expected. And then slowly we rolled out to each contract, putting it live, and we ended up with a 0 downtime transition from gateway to Router. And the results we actually saw once it was implemented were astonishing. I mean, we saw a 33x increase in requests handling for Router over Gateway. We were able to handle 1,000 requests a second instead of 30.
Wait, Greg. Did you say 33x?
Yeah.
That sounds phenomenal.
Yes.
My team back home is going to be so happy.
And we saw a 10x improvement on latency. So we were able to, at this point, our router is running P95 of 5 milliseconds instead of 50 that Gateway was running. And so it was a no-brainer. Anybody who's running Gateway, it's a no-brainer to switch to Router. It's phenomenal.
Love it. John, how about you?
I think the key for us was, as a platform team, you get that initial investment, and folks that are part of platform teams, this probably resonates with you. You're kind of like a little startup, pardon the cliche, but you're traveling the S-curve, finding your own product market fit within your own organization. And so the key for us was being, I'm gonna use another cliche, agile, delivering incrementally, delivering early and often. So I'll break it up into two sections. One is it's subgraph onboarding. So that's where we started to really prove the value. So we kind of broke things up into 3 different categories. We had existing graphs that lived outside of our core monograph that were provided net new schema. We had new graphs with some overlap that they wanted to offer to fill that shared access use case I mentioned earlier. And then we had net new functionality. So we went after that first category first. Where we went after a graph that had a well-established schema. It was used in production. All we had to do is onboard it, and we call it a federated GraphQL success story. Okay, great. We shipped that, and if you have ever used your New York Times account page, you're using our first ever subgraph.
I am a loyal member.
Okay.
Let record show.
Then we moved on to that second case. As you can imagine, let's say, hypothetically speaking, you have user-related data spread across a number of different APIs. Each microservice that owns some of those APIs might replicate some of that data so that they have that contextually aware response to requests. So we've consolidated that behind a platform team who rolled a subgraph to represent that user data. So that's the case we delivered right after that other case to prove out that, like, hey, we could do that. We can offer shared APIs via via GraphQL and really start to deduplicate and bring that value. So that's the approach we took. Fast forward, a year later, and we have a number of subgraphs that are on board and filling all three of those categories. I could go on and on about that, but I won't. Now let's talk about migration. So a lot like Greg's team, we needed to show business value. We needed to offer Federation early. So last year we made a decision, okay, we're gonna go, early on, we were gonna go with GraphQL, the gateway, Apollo gateway product. At the time, the router was new on the scene, and we got the question a lot, why didn't you just wait for the router? Well, the reality is we needed to bring federated GraphQL to the business yesterday. So we couldn't just wait for it to come to maturity, we had to ship. So we did it, and that's what we delivered those first few subgraphs on. Now we're in the space where, okay, we need to rebuild the plane while we're flying it, right? So how do we do that at scale? How do we do that with minimal disruption to those teams? Because the reality is, the more disruption you cause them, the less value they see in your platform. So we rolled a net new service using Apollo Router, encapsulated all of our customizations behind. We used a coprocessor model, so I like to call it a sidecar's more efficient cousin. But we encapsulated all of our customizations in coprocessor, and we were able to use edge routing to start shuffling some of our heaviest hitting traffic from a well-established solution, even though I would agree it's a little less than performant, to our ideal solution that really gets us to where we are. A big shout out to, whether Greg knows this or not, Wayfair published some data supporting their move to the router. We use that for our business case when we made a shift too. I guess if I was going to pull it all together, it was like we found ways to deliver that value early while we're on this more long-term platform journey.
So these are key strategies, right? When we're thinking about migrations, and these are long, arduous migrations, what really stood out to me from both your examples is, for you, zero downtime was almost a feature. It was a requirement to have a seamless migration through. And John, what you talked about is how do you show value early and often, such that you can prove the importance and the value of this architecture as you are in this journey of rolling out the migration. So to me, that's almost two stages. There's the first stage where you're setting the stage, you're sowing the seeds, you're getting sponsorship from your leadership. And then once you've hit that critical mass and things start scaling, you now have a platform, congratulations, it's actually being used, and this value that the business is seeing. You start seeing tens of teams and hundreds of developers and hundreds of subgraphs. What changes? How do you at this stage think about governance and do it where you're not being that gatekeeper? So tell me a little about how have you adapted your approach to governance and driving accountability? Greg, let's start with you.
Yeah, so when we first started out, we had small pilots, few teams that we partnered with very closely who were our biggest champions. They saw the graph vision, and they're the perfect people to align with. And we tied those early pilots to things the business cared about, because that's how to get leadership excited. But that only lasts so long, and then you have to start getting the skeptics, and you have to start growing it from there. And being a gatekeeping pilot, you can only do that so long before you have to open the floodgates. And so we kind of learned early on that we needed automation. We needed to drive meaningful interactions through technology, because we couldn't keep having meetings with an ever-growing number of people attending just to discuss schema. Right. And so we took an approach of building ownership and accountability into our graph implementation very early on, so that as teams created concepts in the graph, they assumed ownership of those concepts. And as teams extended or used those concepts, they, through automated tooling, we drove interactions with the owners of those concepts so that they could grow responsibly and in a healthy way. And that's kind of our approach, and we've seen great success in that, and building a quality graph that's honestly, it's 3 years in, it's standing the test of time.
And Greg, it's very interesting to me, right? How you've adapted that. You went from a white glove, get the first few onto the platform, and then before, like you said, before you open the floodgates, you want to make sure you've got the right automation, the right tooling in place. Is there any story from that time that stands out to you? Either a positive one or I would do that differently.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that we definitely got it wrong a few times before we got it right. As we tried to put that tooling in place, we're trying to think of what are the ways that things could go wrong. Because we had a small sample set where we carefully crafted success stories. And so then it's, what could go wrong? And so like one example of where we went right is from the get-go, we were very opinionated about the types of pagination that the graph could include. Cursor-based or a very specific design of offset base. Huge success there. Everybody's doing it consistently. We did not roll out with good mutation guidance. And so it's a wild west. And that's one of those things where over time we're having to try to roll that back and teach people different approaches that will equip them for success to build those concepts into the graph.
Thank you. John, how about you?
This is an exciting subject for me. We took a community approach because governance is a pretty strong word, right?
Stewardship.
Yes,
empowerment.
That's a much better word because I'm in a room full of technologists. So tell me if you agree with this. Like ivory tower, top down, authority-driven governance. How well does that work with the teams of very autonomous, free-thinking engineers? It doesn't typically turn out well. So we knew we needed to bring the community along with us. So we have what I like to call the 3 legs of our stewardship model stool. One is we started at what we call a schema working group. Schema working group is a group of folks that are not passive contributors, they're actual decision makers that we bring together technical leaders from all the major domain areas across the organization. Now we keep the group small enough to actually make decisions, but that's a way to empower them to guide the shape of our super graph and then maintain buy-in, bring folks along so that we don't stand in the way as an approval authority. Our nature as a GraphQL platform team is we provide some guidance and have a heavy influence on the direction we go, but at the end of the day, everybody's on the same page. The second leg of our stool is our subgraph partners group, and this is product management driven. We very much take the approach that our platform is a commercial-like product we offer internally. So a subgraph partners group is the connection that our product management team keeps in touch with our, for lack of a better term, customers. And so that's a core component and a communication mechanism we use to talk about new features, keep in tune with what folks need, and follow through on that. Then the third thing is our GraphQL community of practice. And this is a little more generic. It doesn't necessarily need to be all federated GraphQL. This is a group that looks at how we GraphQL at the times. Whether you work in the client, whether you work on the server side, whether you're working with Apollo, DGS, GQL Gen, it's where we bring it all together. And if you want to know more about that, the leader of that group is sitting in the back of the room. His name is Ryan Hennessy. Feel free to ask him all kinds of questions afterward. But it's a group we unify across our little GraphQL community. We have like quarterly summit-style talks where we kind of refine how we implement GraphQL at the times, regardless of what technology we're using across.
That's amazing. So what I'm hearing you say is you've got a stewardship stool with allies across the organization with different roles as well. And what's interesting that both of you shared is the strategy for what governance or stewardship looks like at scale is very different from what it looks at the early phases of your journey. And so there is no value to building a platform unless there is impact and outcomes. So Brendan, I'd love to hear, what is one thing you're most proud of in this journey in terms of the impact you've landed? And hint, hint, nudge, nudge, where to from here? You heard the AI strategy needs an API strategy. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think you know, one of the things that we did early on was because we weren't ready to go for Federation right out the gate, and so we started with you know, this idea of GraphQL islands, right? And so there was I think a lot of people in the organization needed to kind of learn a lot about GraphQL, and I think that really helped set the stage where they're like, oh, okay, I kind of get GraphQL now. And then we're like, but wait, now let's do Federation, right? And so, you know, I think that helped a lot. I think that was a pretty big success. You know, I think the other thing too is our developers really love GraphQL, right? It definitely makes their lives easier. Turns out it's a lot easier to write GraphQL services than REST services. You know, if you need to follow a strong standard with REST APIs, it takes a lot of work and a lot of code. Right. And it's not fun code, right? Like, it's just not enjoyable stuff. And so the teams that are writing the services love it. The client teams love it too, because, you know, orchestration code is also not fun. And that code that you need to do to translate from one API to another API, also not fun. So we get rid of that. Our developers are pretty happy, and they can produce, you know, APIs much faster and more efficiently than they used to. So that's pretty big.
Happy developers are happy products and happy users. Greg, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think of all the things that we've built at Wayfair, and we've done a whole bunch of really cool technological solutions to very complicated problems. But the thing I think I'm most proud of is just the community that we've been able to build around GraphQL at the company. I mean, we have a strong developer community focused on building the best GraphQL we can build, because we've introduced that accountability, we introduced that ownership, we built tooling to guide and foster and grow that within the company. And it really shows. It's one of the most active developer communities at Wayfair, all working together, all helping answer questions. I mean, the thing I love the most is when, you know, we have a support forum in Slack. And when I see somebody ask a question, and before I can get to answer it, somebody else working in GraphQL shows up and answers it for them. Oh man, that's a proud moment right there. Because that's really what we set out to build. More than any of the tooling we built, that community is really what we set out to build.
That resonates, Greg. John?
I'm going to give you a very engineering manager flavored answer.
I'll take
it.
I'll take it, especially at the heels of that one.
Absolutely. The impact I'm most proud of is the impact we have on other people and teams, and seeing their success based on what we're able to provide them. And I've got a couple of examples, and both from this week actually, because when people have an impact, we build better products. Our users are happy. A team launched a new subgraph and new feature early in the week. And they gave, you know, we do these internal product announcements, and they gave, you know, the GraphQL platform team this great shout out. We were able to do this thing because we have this platform that we can do it on. And it's fantastic. That's part of the goal. So another one today, an existing subgraph team was able to release a new feature powered by their subgraph. Their product announcement didn't mention us at all because they didn't need us.
That's
They didn't need us for a single thing, and that's the goal.
And John, if I think about the before and the after story, before when you said the old architecture, you had your team being that bottleneck, to this story you shared of the subgraph team releasing something and you didn't even have to be involved. That's a full perfect circle right there. So when I think about the takeaways from today, for me, architecting the future and the strategies around it come down to the 3 A's. acceleration for the business, where GraphQL Federation provides that architecture where on one hand, teams and APIs can evolve independently, and on the other, you can still get that unified access in a safe, governed, scalable, performant way. Autonomy and agility for teams as you're thinking about rolling out this platform, thinking about early wins, fast adoption, bagging the early value. And accountability at scale, baking that into the very platform so you can do things in a governed way, in a self-service way at scale. But I'd love for each of you to share, one or two things you want to land with the audience that we didn't get to cover too. Brendan, how about you?
Yeah, I think I mentioned a bunch of things in my presentation, and there's kind of a theme there to all of them. And so the biggest takeaway for me personally that I learned here is that the underlying theme of all of those is changing culture, right? And so I think the big takeaway for me is how we can use platforms and technology to sort of foster the kind of culture that we want to have.
I love it, and
So
that is
that's kind of a big one.
Yeah, and that's especially one which has compounding value. It isn't a today or a tomorrow thing. That's a legacy you get to build. Thank you, John.
Piggybacking on what Brendan mentioned about fostering or building a new culture, sometimes that means a transformation as a team. And we've undergone, Ryan can tell you, a pretty significant transformation in the last year as we became a platform team, once a service team. And so thinking about how we operate, how we support our customers looks very different today than it did a year ago. And so I would say changing that operating model is one thing I didn't mention. It's a big part of that journey. The other thing that I would mention is make good friends in the industry. Because you'll learn from their successes and failures, and maybe you've got some to share with them as well. So
that's amazing. Culture, community. Greg, close us up.
Yeah, I think this is maybe true of technology in general, but it is especially true, as we've found as we've gone on our GraphQL journey. We don't set out with technology to solve just any old problem. We set out to solve people problems. Whether it's solving a problem for a customer, which is maybe why even your company exists, or to solve a problem for a developer. Brendan said, happy developers, right? That's a people problem. Unhappy developers, that's a people problem. We can solve that. Time to market, that's a people problem. It's people not able to get things done fast enough. And ultimately, if you go with that lens, I'm solving people problems, you're approaching it with the right mindset to actually be able to successfully solve them and make meaningful change at the company. Because your biggest detractors, it's a people problem. Something's there holding them back. And unlocking that's how you get them on board. It's not showing, proving the numbers. It's getting underneath what is holding them back. And to us, that's what we found, and approaching it as a people problem has been our biggest success.
Thank you, Greg. I'm hearing trust and empathy as a big takeaway as well, focusing on the people. All right, thank you, everyone. We can open it up to questions now. Do we have the time for it? Any questions in the room?
Just one last question maybe is just, were there surprises? Right, when you're looking back, is there something that really surprised you about the journey that you went through that you would share to those that are sort of following in your footsteps? Anything that come to mind?
So I think the biggest surprise for me, actually, which was kind of interesting, was that it kind of took a long time to convince, but then once I got to that point, it happened really fast. And so I think, once people got it, they got it.
Once it clicked, the aha moment. Greg, John, anything you want to add?
I would.
Okay.
I think Brendan really put it really well, because once it clicked, they started lining up at the door, and we were like, oh God, how are we going to onboard all of these subgraphs, and how quickly can we do it?
Self-serve tooling and governance. Talk to Greg. All right, everybody, that's a wrap. Thank you very much, and see you at happy hour.